G'day you mob, welcome to this episode. Today we are reacting to Australian English versus British English from the Joel and Lia channel, and I have a little challenge for these guys. Hopefully they'll see this video, but I have a challenge for them at the end. Anyway, let's get into it.
Right, so we've had a few comments, not that many, but a few people saying that is our English accent the same as Australian accent?
I get this question all the time. How does it differ? And I think a lot of the time they're referring to RP, British pronunciation, to Australian English. And the interesting thing here before we get into this video a little further is that British English, if that's an English, has so much more diversity in terms of accents and dialects, obviously because it has been evolving over a lot more time in that one area. Australia sort of just has this general versus broad pronunciation today that's more associated with rural versus city, as opposed to in Great Britain, in Ireland, Wales, Scotland, where it's much more regional.
So we thought we'd do a video just to clear up the differences, because they are quite similar, but also they are very different.
So here are 4 differences that we've noticed from the Australian accent to the English accent, and this video is just an overview of these. It's not going into major detail. Please let us know if you would like that video in the comments below.
So the first difference of an Australian accent to an English one is something called alveolar flapping, which sounds rude. Flapping. The flap of the tongue.
They say that it sounds rude because flap is a sort of vulgar term that can be used at times to refer to a woman's you can work the rest out, or at least either side of a woman's you can work the rest out. That's what he is referring to there. Anyway, let's keep going.
So it's more of a similarity to American English than it is to British English, because Australians tend to flap their T's and their D's. So in words like water, they'd say water. Instead of butter, they'd say butter.
Butter.
He's nailed this. He's absolutely nailed this. We do this much more frequently than we would ever say those T sounds clearly as a T, as a proper T sound. So if I was really articulating the word and enunciating because maybe someone didn't hear me and they were saying, what was he saying? I couldn't hear him. I'd say a water, in the water, right? So, or butter, I need butter. But generally, I would never pronounce it that way. I would say water and butter. The interesting thing here with those 2 words is that they both end with ER. And so in Australian pronunciation, you will pronounce this as the vowel sound like in the word cup or stuck or duck. It's the short sound at the end of the word. However, it's not always the case. It will be the schwa if it is within a phrase, right? If there is a sound that comes after that word. So if I said, I need to see the water, because water's at the end of the phrase, I'd say water with the vowel sound. If water was in the middle of the phrase, the water looks deep. The water looks deep. I would use the schwa. Interesting. Received pronunciation, which I assume these guys have a variation of. They're probably not both from the exact same area in, I think it is the southeast of Britain, where you'll find received pronunciation around London. But generally with those word endings, instead of they will just use the schwa sound. So you'll hear water and butter. I've butchered the British accent, so feel free to react to that, guys. Feel free to take me to task with my British pronunciation as well.
Butter, water,
ladder,
anything with a D, double D.
Basically, but they still have the non-roticity that we have. So they don't say water. Americans say water.
So what he's talking about there when he says non-roticity, Australian pronunciation is non-rotic, like received pronunciation in Britain, where we only pronounce the R sound as a R sound if there is a vowel sound after the R. That can be that the R is at the front of a word or within a word where there's a vowel after it, or it can be at the end of a word where there is a vowel in the next word. So a good example would be, I would say, I can see the water, and I'm not saying the R at the end of the word water, but if water is now in a sentence and say there is a vowel after it in the next word, the water is deep, I do say the R. The water is. I use that R to link those 2 vowel sounds. That's what happens in Australian English and in received pronunciation. In American English, they will always say the R because it is rhotic.
They don't say water, they say water.
Water.
Americans would say water too. They wouldn't say water or water. Say water.
Yes, so they're not emphasising the R on the end of words.
But how would we say it?
Water.
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 Butter.
Ta.
Butter.
Butter. water.
That's a big thing for noticing the difference between received pronunciation and Australian English. You'll hear the T and the D pronounced in these words where when there's a vowel on either side in Australian English, it'll be a T flap. Water, butter, ladder, later. Whereas for them, it would be water, butter, ladder, and later.
And it would only be in slang English that we might say water.
That's something interesting too. So she's talking about, I guess, slang English in Great Britain where they would use the glottal stop there to say the T instead of the T flap, or just saying the T and the D as normal. So she said water, and she's stopping it in her throat. So the glottal stop is done by using the vocal cords and the throat to close the air and stop the air for a moment in the place of a T or a D. So they might say, I think it would just be a T actually. I don't think they would do it for Ds, but they would say water, stopping it in the throat as opposed to water or water.
Butter.
Yeah.
Butter, water.
Butter.
But then that's even slightly different because that one with London where they say butter, that's a glottal stop. So they're saying
Butter.
Which is different to the flap of the tongue when you say butter.
Butter. It is different, isn't it? It's very different.
Something interesting to mention here quickly too is Australian English has the glottal stop. We would actually use it, and it's typically used when there is a T and then another consonant. So a good example of this is the word Batman. I would actually stop the T in my throat using a glottal stop instead of stopping it in my mouth, instead of muting it in my mouth. So I would say Batman. Batman. Another word might be butler. Butler. I'm stopping it in my throat. I'm not going butler. Butler. I'm saying butler. Butler. Batman. Glottal T. So we do use it. It's just not used the same way and in the same place as with received pronunciation from Great Britain.
Worth listening out for that flap.
Yeah.
What's
flap.
the complex word?
It's alveolar.
Doesn't that sound...
I think that refers to the part of the mouth that the tongue is flapping across. It's like up there. So if I were to try and describe that, water, it's hitting the same place that you would place the tongue to say the T or the D sound, right? That ridge behind the teeth that sort of curves up like that. And then you've got the roof of the mouth. The tongue kind of flicks across that and just touches it briefly for an instant, as opposed to completely stopping the airflow. Water. So it flicks across that part. I think that's it.
If you want the long word, it's intervocalic alveolar flap.
Sounds like this guy knows his linguistics.
So that's what you'll probably get. That's what you'll probably get if you're listening to an audiobook about language.
Yeah, what does that mean to you? You
Nothing.
don't need to know that.
It means nothing.
Just call it a flap. It's
Just
fine.
A flap is fine. Just
True,
all remember our
true.
flaps.
Yeah. Number one flap.
She's making reference to something else there. Cheeky, Lia.
Flap. We've talked a little bit about roticity, but mainly flap.
So linking on from the flap, which is number 1, we're going to talk a little bit about roticity, which is number 2. So as we mentioned, Australians don't have the rhotic R, which means that at the end of words that end in ER, they'll just drop it.
It's not just ER. It's any word that ends with typically an R sound. So it can be ER, AR, OR, IR. It can even be RE. It can be, I'm trying to think of the other examples. There are quite a few different ways. In fact, Future Pete, when editing this, put them up on the side here. And I've actually done a video on one simple tip to sound Australian where I talk about this. But yeah, so polar, center or center, water. What's another one? Jaguar. Any word where there's an R at the end, or there should be an R sound if it was rhotic like American English. We don't say it unless there's a vowel afterwards. And
leave it open, like we said with water, teacher, water, teacher, letter. Similar to British, but very different to American.
And that is, like you said, it's very similar to British, and that's probably one of the reasons why people get confused between Australian English and British English, is because we both sound non-rhotic. So to an American's ear, they're thinking, oh, you're just all part of the same thing.
The interesting thing is I can hear a much more regional dialect or accent with Lia than I can with Joel. I don't know their background, but I would say for whatever reason, Joel has a very, very neutral British accent that I think the average person wouldn't be able to place, besides saying, oh yeah, he's from England, he's British.
That's just one feature that we share with Australians. It's not...
And as a Brit... do you feel that Australians sound closer to us than Americans? Because I do.
Do you? Yeah. I think so. In my head, you've got British English speakers here, and you've got American English speakers here, and Australians are in the middle.
In the middle? No way. I reckon we're way closer to the Brits. Australian English came from British English, right? We were colonized by the Brits, and there was an influx of Cockney people as well as other people from other areas around Great Britain and Scotland. And the next generation or two ended up developing their own pronunciation. And so Australian English literally comes from Great Britain. It has nothing to do with American English. That was sort of a separate branch. The other thing for me is the biggest thing that you'll notice with American English is just that rhotic R constantly at the ends of vowels. They will always say that R in words like bird and herd. It's just this sound, it's this quality to the melody of American English that you will always notice. It's almost like they have something stuck in their mouth over their tongue because their tongue is constantly up like this, saying those R sounds. You know, like I went to the street the other day and I saw my friends drinking some water. You just get used to hearing those R's all the time. But yeah, I'd say we're way closer to the Brits.
I think we share similar features.
Sorry, Americans, for my horrible American accent.
Shame. Shame.
Shame. Shame.
It's because the flapping is it's a very American feature, yet the non-rhoticity is a very British feature. So I feel like they are in the middle.
Yeah.
It's a fair call based on those two sounds in terms of there being one that's British, one that's American, using the flap T or D that is very common with American English, comparing it to the non-rhoticity that is very common in RP. But I would say the vowel sounds in Australian English are much closer to the British vowel sounds in RP than they are to American vowel sounds, especially the diphthongs.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's so many Australians in London as well
Yeah.
that it becomes so much, you just hear it all the time.
We haven't actually given them an example of what it sounds like. Maybe we need to talk a bit.
Ooh, here we go. Now we get to dissect some potential Aussie accents. What would you say? Aussie spies, right? They're putting it on. So this would be interesting. I wonder, who do you reckon, guys? Who do you reckon's going to do better? Do you reckon Lia will smash this more than Joel? Or do you think Joel's going to smash it? Leave a comment below and let me know. And then let's find out.
In Australian.
Joel watches a lot of Neighbours. So.
I love Neighbours and I watch it all the time. And, I don't watch it so much anymore because I ran out of time because it's 20 minutes a day and that's like so hard to keep up with.
But if you think about it secretly, Joel, we have been watching 1 hour a day of Love Island.
Man, Joel's just crushed it. If I had only heard that phrase from him talking about Neighbours, I would have thought he was Australian. Leah, on the other hand, it sounds to me very similar to how she sounded normally, but there were a few vowel sounds that she had changed that sounded closer to Australian English, but they sounded a little over the top slightly. But let's just have another listen again to Joel. That was intense.
Yeah, it's about right.
Yeah.
And there's so many Australians in London as well that it becomes so much, you just hear it all the time.
We haven't actually given them an example of what it sounds like. Maybe we need to talk a bit in Australian.
In Australian, Joel watches a lot of Neighbours. So.
See, she's still saying a lot. So I'm not sure if she's gone into the Australian accent because she's using the glottal stop there where I would use a T flap. A lotta. She said a lot. But have a listen to Joel.
I love Neighbours and I watch it all the time. And
he nailed the I in time.
I don't watch it so much anymore because I ran out of time because it's 20 minutes a day.
He nailed day, and it's these diphthongs I think that are really sticking out that are like boom Australian.
And that's like so hard to keep up with.
He nasalized the I in like, so it was almost like a like instead of like. So again, that's something very common with Australian English. They're going to nasalize a lot of these vowels, and that's that spectrum between general Australian English where it's not as nasalized. There can be a little bit to the broader Australian English where you're going to hear a lot more nasalization in the way that they speak. It's almost like the level of the voice has moved up into the nose a little bit. So you're going to hear this a lot more in the nose than you're going to hear in the mouth like this. But have another listen.
Because I ran out of time because it's 20 minutes a day and that's like so hard to keep up with.
But if you think about it secretly, Joel, we have been watching 1 hour a day of...
She said day there, but it sounded still a bit like RP, like British. A day, instead of a day.
We have been watching 1 hour a day of Love Island.
Love Island. Yeah, not bad. Not bad, Leah.
Island.
Love Island is taking over our life.
Like, seriously.
She did well there. She did very well there. It's taking over our life. And again, it's weird. It's like that diphthong I becomes more nasalized when it gets stressed. It's taking over our life.
So let's move on. So that's just a little snippet of us trying out Australian.
It's not bad. Not bad. I think Joel has definitely honed his skills in here. He has dialed in that pronunciation and Jesus, very impressive, man. I can't imagine being able to nail another accent like that.
Obviously, we're not experts, but this is just because there's so many Australians in London, we hear it quite a lot.
Definitely. And you do, like every accent, you get extremes and non-extremes. You'll find some Australians have a very subtle accent, whereas others will be really harsh. So obviously, this Australian accent we're doing can't represent the whole of the country.
Our friend Trent from Trent and Luke lives over here in London, and I can't even hear it now.
No, just occasionally you'll hear a elongated vowel, and you'll go, oh, he's Australian.
I'm trying to think of which vowels they'd be talking about. So there are obviously short vowels and long vowels, but I don't know RP vowels well enough to be able to tell you which ones he's referring to.
That's our third point, the elongated vowel.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out. Maybe if you just shut up, Pete, and watch the video, you would know.
Obviously, like Joel said, it can be a little bit stereotypical to assume that every Australian says their words quite extended.
Something interesting that she just did right then, and I don't know if it was just mispronunciation or if it was how she pronounces the word says. I would always say says using an vowel sound instead of a, as you would say in say. I say, he says. So it becomes that short vowel sound. But there are dialects in Britain where they will say says. He says. I don't know which ones they are, but I've heard this a few times. And that is a very interesting thing that, again, gives away straight away, oh, they're from Britain. They're from a certain area in Britain that I'm even sure Brits would hear and be like, I know where you're from. So that's something really interesting. Have another listen.
Australian says their words quite extended with the vowel sounds.
And that's done by widening the mouth. But see, they don't talk like that.
Something Joel's just done there, though, is sort of start to sound a bit like a New Zealander with his E's. So he's kind of made it a little more, like, I don't know, there's something a little more. I felt New Zealander as soon as I heard that. Let's have another listen.
Every Australian says their words quite extended with the vowel sound.
Yeah, that yes instead of yeah. So maybe it's the He's using an I instead of an in the place of right? So instead of yes, he's saying yes. That's something that New Zealanders will do all the time. It is why we will hear them say sex when they're trying to say six, and we will hear them say six when they're trying to say sex. They do this crazy reverse of the vowels. And they'll say seven instead of seven.
And that's done by widening the mouth. But see, they don't.
He did it again for C. It was a bit strange.
Ended with the vowel sounds.
And that's done by widening the mouth. But see, they don't talk like that. They're not slow and...
No.
Some of us are. Speak for yourself.
They don't elongate it like that much, but they extend it more than we would in our accent.
So we might say my life story, and an Australian might say my life story.
So
she went a little over the top with or, I think there, though. It became a bit of a diphthong, so it sort of changed its quality, whereas for us it's just a long vowel like story, my life story, my life story, my life story.
They extend it more than we would in our accent.
So we might say my life story, and an Australian might say my life story.
Yeah, she's overdoing it. I think she's making it more like a diphthong.
So you see,
I think already that sounds a bit extended.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? My life story.
My life story. And when you do...
It's so funny, though, too. It feels like it's shifted way to the broad accents when they do that, not just the neutral one, which I think is probably the more difficult accent to nail, because all the stuff that you see from people in movies and a lot of these stereotypes, they always have the broadest accents, right? There's that video with the guy being interviewed on the news talking about being in his jocks, and he's like, really got a broad accent, we're using mate and everything like that with this nasal stuff, and everyone seems to love it.
And he goes, don't be a hero, mate. And I said, I'm not trying to be a hero, but the police are coming.
But I think, interestingly enough, I reckon the general accent's harder to nail.
You say your vowels so extended, the words become...
extended. We wouldn't say extended. I think that's RP leaking in there again too. Extended, we would say extended.
Clearer and they land on people.
Yeah.
Australians are great public speakers, I think.
Yeah.
The words really land on people.
I love it. I read an article recently.
It's so interesting hearing this from, I think these guys, Joel and Lia, are both actors or actresses, so they have learnt about pronunciation from a completely different space than I have, where I've learnt about Australian pronunciation from books and courses and learning the IPA and trying to really break down how I say things and learn about the symbols and the variations. It's really interesting when you learn or you hear about how actors and actresses learn to do different accents, because I don't think they bother with any of the kind of jargon, linguistics, IPA side of things, and it's much more done on experiential feel of things, right? It's much more, where would you place this in your mouth and how does it feel? And two ways of achieving the same thing. Very interesting.
That was saying that Australian accent's great on them. I don't think it does at all. I think it's a really nice, soothing accent. And I like you said, I think I automatically listen more when it's an Australian speaking. Because
some really interesting stuff, especially for Australians, is when we watch American TV shows and there's one actor or actress that's Australian. Lost was the perfect example of this, where the young blonde girl was Australian.
Did you ever sleepwalk before?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't know.
And it's such a trope when you hear the Australian accent as an Australian amongst Americans. You see and hear all the Americans and you're kind of like, okay, that's the norm. That's what's normal. And you hear the Australian and you're like, oh, Jesus. Like, oh my God. Ugh, this person sounds like a yobbo. Like, the accent's so strong. So it's really funny that we have that experience. I mean, Australians watching this, let me know in the comments below. Have you had that experience where when you're watching a TV show or a movie, you see an Australian come in when everyone else is British or American and you're like, ugh, this is just standing out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, they do. They land it more. And
exactly.
I like it.
As well as elongating the vowel sounds, Australians tend to have quite a sing-songy rhythm to the way they speak.
Yeah. And they tend to end on a rising intonation. So I think it's called... I can't remember. It's from my linguistic days at university. Something like Australian rising intonation. I think it's called ARI. I might be getting it wrong.
QI,
Anyway,
okay.
Australians tend to have constant rising intonation even when they're not asking questions.
That was New Zealand. Questions instead of questions. Questions. Questions.
So like they'll always talk like this when they're not even asking questions. And like that is a very overdone stereotype.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing they'll do.
It's annoying even for us. If you hear someone doing that all the freaking time, you're just like, oh my God. And it's usually done really badly when people are listing things. So if someone told you about their day, where they had been, and they said, so I went to the beach and then I went and saw my friends and then I got something to eat. And then they'll go up, 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 up. And then the last thing they'll come down. So it would be like, and then I got something to eat. And then I went home. And it gets really annoying even for Australians hearing this all the time. But yes, we do kind of do this subconsciously more than other English dialects.
I was at a succulent garden the other day. It was probably the best day of my life. Some of these plants, incredible, you know what I mean? Some of these plants.
And that is perhaps what the article you read was referring to when it said that the accent grates on them a little bit.
Yeah, because we tend to end on a minor note.
I've noticed this though too in American TV shows, especially with teenage girls. Not that I watch a load of American TV shows with lots of teenage girls, but those movies that come out like Clueless and I can't even name them. I watched them years ago. But the girls tend to do it there as well. And I wonder too if there's a gender difference in Australia where that uptalk or that question intonation is much more associated with women than it is with men, because it's interesting how those differences can arise.
Don't we? We end
Brits
down.
Always go down. Oh my God.
They go, oh my God. Yeah, oh my God. Like it goes up. And it's quite sing-songy.
Yeah, it's quite up and down, like Welsh.
I don't know. I don't notice. Does it sing-songy for you guys? I've never really noticed any sing-songiness in Australian English, to be honest.
They go up and down when they're talking like this, and they're really colourful with what they're saying.
Just sort of draw a graph of where the vocal tones are going.
Yeah.
Be like, up and down.
Yeah. And one of the final things...
Now I'm going to have to go away and like record myself speaking or watch one of these videos again and be like, how am I talking? You know, take some notes.
To note is the abbreviations that they use are different to the abbreviations that we use in British English.
Now, this is my favourite thing. That
I think what he's talking about here is shortened words, so slang words.
I'm actually not aware of until we were just planning this video 5 minutes ago.
So, I can't believe you haven't heard it, but that's probably because I watch Australian soaps and stuff.
Yes.
He's talking about soap opera TV shows, like dramas.
But so instead of saying this afternoon, they might say that, but they'll also say the Savo.
Yeah.
So they abbreviate this afternoon to the Savo. ARVO.
Sounds so posh. You can just imagine a Brit saying the Savo.
Really? I would never, ever, ever associate those kinds of slang words and their usages with poshness. That is not something I can imagine ever associating with it, because most posh people in Australia wouldn't use those kinds of slang terms.
What do you call Savo?
It's what such rah like Sloane Square posh people
exactly
would say. The Savo.
that. It's so funny.
Yeah. But they'd be like, what are you doing the Savo? And then they also, I've not heard this one, but I saw it online, bizzo instead of business.
I wouldn't use this, but I've heard of it. Arvo, on the other hand, everyone uses. Every single Australian. Don't make a liar out of me, guys.
That's none of your bizzo.
Business.
I have never heard anyone at Neighbours use the word bizzo for business.
Bizzo.
Independent bizzo woman.
I'm an bizzo woman.
So, Trent, if you're watching this, can you let us know whether you actually say bizzo?
I'm going to ask our Australian friends how true that is. And
I would know instantly what you meant if you said it's none of your bizzo, but I would never say that. It sounds a bit, I don't know. I would just say business.
if it's like, oh yeah, only lame people would say that.
That's-
Not lame, it's just not common.
But also, you know this one. Instead of barbecue, they'd say barbie.
Oh yeah.
Shrimp on the barbie. That's the classic
Australian
phrase.
stereotype.
But they say barbie instead of barbecue.
There are loads of these that almost are just words. We don't even see them as slang. We just know them as words, right? So things like Barbie, sunnies, boardies, wetty, all these things that are kind of items where we just become so used to using that one word, it doesn't feel like we're actually using slang. It's just what it's called.
Barbie. I can't say that without thinking of Barbie dolls.
Yeah,
Yes,
that.
that sounds like American. All right, guys, and I have a little challenge for Joel and Lia. If they ever watch this, I would love to see their best impersonation of the following phrase. I swung by the servo, the Savo, to grab some prawns to chuck on the Barbie. Okay, so that's my little challenge, guys. If you want to learn more Australian English, check this video out, and I'll see you next time. Bye!